In Ernest Hemingway's novel, The Sun Also Rises, there is a passage in which a character named Mike is asked how he went bankrupt. 2 ways, he answers. Gradually, then suddenly. Much the same can be said for the rules-based international order. It was founded in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War as a coherent system of global governance and became fully realized in the aftermath of the Cold War. But beginning in the first decade of the 21st century, it began to fray gradually, and in recent times, it has collapsed almost completely, rather suddenly. The result is multipolar disorder, characterized by eruption of regional conflicts, strategic competition, the moves towards deglobalization, the disruption of global supply chains, and the rise of authoritarian populism. The ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine has already claimed more than 500,000 lives and shows no signs of immediate resolution. The Middle East has once again become inflamed by the Israel-Hamas war and charges of genocide against the Netanyahu regime. The US is locked in bitter confrontations with China and Russia, while at the same time becoming a deeply divided and polarized country itself. The UN Security Council is completely dysfunctional and missing from all the major conflicts of the day. The WTO's dispute resolution mechanism has almost stalled completely, and the Sustainable Development Goals have gone for a toss. Add to that the after effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which claimed more than 15 million lives, the looming threat of irreversible climate change, and the disruption caused by the rise of artificial intelligence, and you have the perfect recipe for global chaos and instability. In this new world disorder, alliances, positions, decisions, and actions have become unpredictable and transactional, driven mainly by self-interest. Growing up as a diplomat, we all learned about the 2 main theories of international relations, realism and liberalism. Well, the latest theory of international relations is called opportunism. The very fabric of the international system is unraveling, leaving a vacuum where cooperative governance once stood, and ushering in a new era fraught with uncertainty and peril. So how did we get here so suddenly, and how do we fix it? This is what will be the subject of our discussion this afternoon, and I'm privileged to be joined by an extraordinary panel of experts who have witnessed and reported on these critical issues firsthand. Of course, Gideon Levy, you already know, an eminent journalist, an author known for his courageous reporting on the Israel-Palestinian conflict, Selma Dabbagh, a distinguished writer and lawyer, and Shashank Bengali, a seasoned journalist who has provided in-depth coverage on global crises. So let us begin with the most immediate crisis confronting the world, what's happening in Gaza. Gideon, why did Hamas carry out that attack on October 7? What did it hope to achieve, and what was its endgame?
Couldn't you find me an easier question for the start? I'm not a member of Hamas and even not a supporter of Hamas, and I'm not sure I can get into their minds. But as the General Secretary of the UN said on the beginning of the war and was attacked brutally by Israel, everything has a context. And so did also this attack has. By saying that there is a context, you don't mean to justify it, you don't mean to stand behind it, but you cannot ignore the context. It didn't come out of the blue sky. What was surprising was the success of this attack in their terms. And I'm sure that they by themselves were surprised because they were facing one of the strongest armies in the world, or at least one of the most well-equipped armies in the world with technology, with weapons that no other country has. And then a group of few hundred, I couldn't even call them soldiers, on bicycles, on motorcycles, and in pickup trucks, broke this whole image of the strong Israel. And I remember that my first reaction, I must be very frank with you here, the first hours, I saw that the Berlin Wall is falling. And who wasn't happy when the Berlin Wall fell? Soon later, I realized that there are so many crimes and atrocities that didn't take place, obviously, in Berlin, and the comparison totally collapsed. But I think that you cannot judge Hamas without the context of 18 years of siege, the biggest cage in the world, the biggest prison, open prison in the world, with no perspective for any young people, for anything in their lives, no present, no future. And you cannot expect that this will go on forever. And the Palestinians and the world learned that the only way to achieve something is by force. Israel never gave up anything only by force. This is very depressing, but that's the conclusion. And I think from their point of view, they had at least two, and then I'll finish because you are making signs. They achieved two things which nobody can deny. First of all, the Palestinian issue seemed to be off the table. The world was sick and tired of it. Israelis couldn't care less about them. And all of a sudden, it becomes the main issue of the world now. This is because of this attack. Without this attack, they would have really been forgotten like the Native Americans and never find any solution. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the Israeli lesson that you cannot live on your sword forever. Look what happened, even if you have the strongest army. Look how fragile you are finally, and the solution will never be a military one. But unfortunately, Israel does not draw any conclusions for what happened on the 7th, except of, again, victimization and presenting ourselves not only as the victims, but the only victims. 35,000 people were killed, and Israel is the only victim.
But now, of course, the humanitarian crisis resulting from Israeli actions have reached alarming proportions. As you said, 36,000 Palestinians dead, more than half of them children, and the remaining population of Gaza now being starved of food, of water, of oil. I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu has even rejected the immediate ceasefire that came as a ray of hope when President Biden presented that. So what is the end game for Netanyahu in all this?
We have to separate between Netanyahu and Israel, but in the same time, don't have illusions. It's not all about Netanyahu. It's very comfortable for everyone to blame everything, to put everything on Netanyahu. And once we will just get rid of this Satan, of this demon, then Israel will turn back to the paradise it was, this democratic, progressive country. The occupation will be over, the apartheid will be over, the war will be over. No. So Netanyahu has an agenda right now, which unfortunately is a very personal one. He is fighting for his political survival, nothing but this. But I give him more credit than this because I happen to know him a bit in former times. There is some ideology also in his veins. But right now it's really about his survival, and therefore he has to go, and his government has to go. But please don't have too many expectations about the substitute. It will be nicer, it will be less corrupted, it will talk nicer to the world, whatever niceties can do, but by the end of the day we will get the same policy. And the substitute to Netanyahu, unfortunately, don't forget the majority of Israelis are supporting this war until this very moment, including the leftists and the peaceniks and those who demonstrate for releasing the hostages and those who are demonstrating against Netanyahu. None of them is demonstrating against the crimes which are being committed in Gaza, none of them. So therefore, it's not Netanyahu, it's Israel.
Selma, as a Palestinian writer yourself, you have grappled with and reported on and written about Palestinian identity and their aspirations. How has that identity and those aspirations been shaped by what's happening in Gaza, especially among the youth? And how do you see that will evolve, and what does it mean for the Palestinian cause?
Okay, thank you for the question. Thank you for inviting me to join this panel and to the Jaipur Literary Festival. In terms of how it's shaping us, I think because the level, the gravity, the extent of the current genocide is so unparalleled. I once wrote a short fiction piece which was set in Gaza, and I met another writer who also wrote a short fiction piece. We both thought they were very negative, but none of them went anywhere close to what we're experiencing at the moment. It has galvanized us, it has brought us together, it has made us have much more of a clearer agenda with regards to using the vocabulary of international law to solidify movements like the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, despite the incredibly strong opposition to it, which comes in a variety of forms, from the personal to the political. And I think it has made us feel that we're part of a movement which is more connected to issues which are broader within the global majority, not just in terms of the settler colonial, being opposed to a settler colonial agenda, seeing how that mindset of imposing hegemony through dehumanizing the other, we're really like feeling that. You know, the dehumanization is at a level that very few people cannot be frankly extraordinarily disgusted by it. And it is becoming mainstream, as Gideon's saying. This isn't like the fringe. This isn't like, you know, the right in Europe. This is mainstream viewing of Palestinians as being really less than animals. So it has brought about this strong level of revulsion in people's guts globally. And I think we felt that not just with the Palestinian youth, and I'm really impressed by a lot of our student leaders on the campuses. I'm impressed by the number of women that we now have fronting our cause, who are really articulate. We have lawyers like Noura Erakat. We have, you know, and it's really just changing the way that we are appearing in the international stage, I believe. And it's ironic that the groups which were formerly are currently designated as terrorists are the ones who are like aspiring to international law. This is like, you know, Hezbollah will talk about international law, Hamas will talk about international law, whereas the states which used to be seen as being, you know, the sort of product, the birth after the post-Second World War of, you know, something more aspirational for a new world order, are actually denigrating it and undercutting it. And we see this in terms of the attacks on the international rules-based bodies that you're worried about, you know?
Now put on your lawyer's hat for a moment and talk us through the international criminal court's arrest warrants issued against Netanyahu, his defense minister, and 3 Hamas leaders. Will these arrest warrants have any impact at all?
I think they will have an impact, and I want to celebrate for a second, just because it's great that the ICC did this. I think we have to celebrate every small victory, because we're obviously in this for the long game. So great that the ICC moved on it. It was very overdue. It was really slow in coming. If anyone wants a sort of full Palestinian critique of the flaws in the way that it's done, there's somebody at SOAS called Nimr Sultani. He's very good on the international legal aspect. But we have to see there was a marked discrepancy with the ICC's response to Ukraine compared to Gaza. And if they hadn't done anything on Gaza, it would have just meant the end of that body. Another point with regards to the ICC arrest warrants, and this is a story which has just come out in The Guardian, is with regards to there has been a sustained attack on that institution by Israeli Mossad chiefs. I'm sorry, I keep pointing at you. I know you're not in that camp. I'm really sorry. Get it on all sides. Anyway, but there's a sustained attack on Fatou Bensouda, who was so brave, and I think they underestimated her as a black woman in terms of her ability to stand up against them, despite the personal harassment to her and her family. So we have got this investigation open. There have been arrest warrants. Okay, that's a step forward with the ICC. It obviously hasn't slowed down attacks in Gaza. In fact, it seems to speed them up. Every time an international institution tells the Netanyahu government not to do something, then it seems like it sort of makes them determined. So you had the Rafah tent massacre after the last ICJ preliminary rulings, not to go into Rafah. They're like, you know, it's a real sort of up yours, basically. So you had that, and then the Nusayrat school camp. I mean, it's getting difficult to even list the number of these attacks on UN schools and bases where people are seeking seeking safety. What I would like to say, though, with the ICC arrest warrants and with the ICJ, which is separate, that's states, not a criminal prosecutory body, is that both of them are building up a jurisprudence which might not have effect in terms of whether those bodies have the ability to enforce their will through the Security Council or through prosecutions of those individuals. But it may lend weight to attempts by lawyers under the laws of universal jurisdiction to effect arrests in national jurisdictions. And that's a different body. It's very patchwork, it's very complex, but that's more of a possibility. Maybe not the heads of states, but further down the sort of chain of command, that might be possible.
Gideon, your take?
I would like to focus on Israel's reaction.
Yes.
To those, because it's a sequence of new developments in the international community. It's both courts in The Hague, also the ICJ. It is the decision of the General Secretary of yesterday to put Israel in the blacklist of countries that
harm children.
Harm children, and many more resolutions. The reaction in Israel is always the same. The whole world is against us. You are anti-Semites. Even Prime Minister Netanyahu really reached a peak yesterday while claiming that the UN will be in the blacklist of history. I wrote a piece for tomorrow. Before I came here, I had to rush to be on time here. So I asked, how many children did the UN kill that he will get to this blacklist? I know how many children Israel killed. So this reaction is the protection wall of Israel public opinion, maybe the society which lives in the biggest denial in the world today. I don't know one society in which living is so much in denial, while knowing that they are in denial, with the collaboration, the shameful collaboration of Israeli media, who shows nothing from Gaza to Israel. It's only about our victims, our brave soldiers, our losses. There are no children in Gaza, no human beings in Gaza. There are only terrorists in Gaza. And ask any Israeli, leftist or right-winger, you will always get the same justification for any criminal attack. But there were terrorists there. And if there was one terrorist there, we have the right to kill 10,000 Palestinians. And this way of thinking still protects Israel from the truth. And there is no confrontation with the truth, no taking accountability of anything. Nothing can scratch this wall. And this is so astonishing how, you know, Israelis are human beings, people with conscience, they have children. Can't you see what's going on? No. We don't see them as children, and we see anyone who wants to confront us with reality as an anti-Semite. And I must tell you that until now it was working for Israel, because Europe is paralyzed from those allegations that Israel is blaming them as anti-Semites. Try to publish an anti-Israeli critic in Europe today in one of the mainstream newspapers. Everyone is scared. We will be defined as anti-Semites. And that's really your challenge now, because it is about freedom of speech. Each of us knows if he is an anti-Semite or not, and there is anti-Semitism, and it should be fought. But to fall to this trap, that only because there is a chance that someone will say that we are anti-Semites, we will be silenced and not criticized. I mean, I think it is the duty of the world, not the right of the world, the duty of the world to speak up against what's going on, and let Israel call you in any name they call you. You know the truth.
Shashank, bringing you in onto this. Has Israel suffered reputational damage as a result of what's happening in Gaza? And do you see any chances of peace at all in the immediate future?
Look, I think it's clear they've suffered reputational damage. You know, as Gideon's pointed out, you know, it is now increasingly seen as a pariah state, although the penalties for that are not stopping Netanyahu's government or, in fact, moving the needle of public opinion very much in Israel. It's notable that when, as you said, when you have protests in Israel, it's about the way the war is being conducted with regard to bringing home hostages, not about the crimes you know, and the civilian deaths in Gaza. So reputationally, Israel is certainly suffering, but what impact that has, you know, on the way the war is being fought or how long it's going to go on remains to be seen. You know, Netanyahu and Israel can be moved by a few things. They can be moved by the level of U.S. support. President Biden has a powerful role to play, but they've continued to sell weapons. They've just sort of walked this very fine line in the U.S., talking about withholding certain types of bombs, you know, but not about stopping the flow of weapons long term, not about stopping the flow of you know, advanced warplanes and other you know, other material that Israel can use in the future. So I think the damage is certainly there. It will probably keep growing as the war drags on. But as far as to turn to, we would all like to see this conflict end, but to think about how that could happen is very challenging. There are certainly voices inside Israel calling for a ceasefire. There are voices around the world calling for a ceasefire. Israel has, you know, to this point, that the government has been adamant that we don't want to make a deal for a long-term ceasefire. They could accept a temporary one. I think we have to be very clear that a temporary pause or even an end to this war does not mean an end to the Palestinian suffering, to the Palestinian problem for Israel.
Now, coming to the U.S. point, as you rightly said, U.S. is the most influential player in the Israel-Hamas war. And President Biden seems to have staked his entire political capital in shoring up Israel with weapons and with funds. But this is causing a huge backlash. You know, we saw all the college protests. You know, the young people are coming out on the streets saying that, you know, this situation cannot continue. The progressive Democrats are now railing against Biden's, you know, completely blind policy of support towards Israel. And I'm seeing that even among blacks, his support levels is dropping. So do you think Biden is taking his even presidency on supporting Netanyahu and Israel during this war?
Elections in the U.S. are rarely won and lost on foreign policy. I think we have to be very, very clear that you know, these are the types of issues that galvanize people. They can galvanize protests. They can certainly you know, create social media campaigns and create protests. But voters in November, when they tend to go to the polls in the U.S., history has shown that domestic issues, the economy, you know, tend to be what really drive voters to the polls. Now, Biden does have a big problem, as you said, Vikas, in that he has an enthusiasm gap in these important states where Trump voters are more likely to go to the polls to bring Trump back, but Biden voters, because of a number of issues, his age, the war, feeling that the economy is not doing as well as the numbers might say that it is doing, Democratic voters are less likely to be excited and be drawn to the polls. Now, that could change. There could be a domestic issue that moves people. There could be a Supreme Court ruling that gets people to the polls. There could be more movement on abortion. That was a very rallying issue for Democrats 2 years ago. I don't, unfortunately, believe that Gaza can be that issue in America.
But should the world get ready for Trump 2.0? I mean, he's just been convicted of 34 felony charges by a New York court, but his support, I mean, his support among his core constituency still remains intact. So I want you to go out on a limb now and tell us, is there going to be Trump 2.0?
I thought Gideon had the hard questions. Well, look, the closer we get to November, I think you have to look at the polls, and nobody should discount the prospect of Trump 2.0. It's true his support is fairly rock solid among a really large number of Republicans. It's true that that group of people will be energized by the prospect of bringing him back in November. And so I think for the Biden campaign for Democrats, it's certainly extremely worrisome. to look at these numbers and see that they have not moved, even with the convictions, even with the multiple indictments, even with everything, the memory of Trump and what those 4 years were like. But I think, these things can change quickly. There is still, a few months before the election. Both of these men are extremely old. Let's not discount something health-wise happening as well.
Biological event happening.
On either side. Look, let's be fair. But I think you see now in Europe and you see around the world hedging and wondering about whether Trump will come back and how the world should respond to that. So I think we're seeing the impact in elections around the world already.
Speaking of Europe, Selma, do you think the West has lost the moral high ground by its contrasting responses to what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Gaza?
Yeah, I like this idea that the West had a moral high ground. I mean, I think particularly coming from the Arab world, I don't think that's generally the association made. But I think that the level of double standards over Ukraine has been really glaring. And I mean, particularly like speaking as a Brit of Arab descent, it was really kind of shocking to see quite how far the government. I mean, it was wonderful, but I wanted it for everyone. How far the government went in terms of supporting Ukrainian refugees. The amount of emotion, the way that these visa schemes were rushed through, the sponsorship schemes, the art organizations in support. Wonderful, fantastic stuff, but. Oh my God, did they shut up when it came to Palestine? It's like not only would they not do it, they wouldn't match it, they tried to censor those artists and activists and, organizations who try to say anything. I mean, I'm a member of the Society of Authors, and my union basically said, it made a statement on Ukraine, and then in January it said, actually, we don't like making public statements. We don't make political statements. So then the body got together and we said, okay, we just want a statement on a ceasefire. So the management told the writers, the membership, to vote against it, which happened. So you can't even get an artistic institution standing up in support of a ceasefire. I mean, surely when innocent people, as in Gaza, you've got like this population, basically caged children with the highest levels of arms being dropped on them from outside, like, 28 kilos per person. You can ask for a ceasefire, bare minimum standard. And that's why I don't really agree. Not that I disagree with what you said, but on the Shashank, what you were saying about Palestine just being a foreign policy issue. It's not a foreign policy issue. This is bringing down the liberals, I feel, the sort of liberal system across the arts, across the way that the law is being changed, the attempts here, which were luckily thwarted, to get rid of the right to boycott in this country being just one example, and it does get revolved around Israel-Palestine. So I think we have broader issues which are at stake, and this discrepancy and the racism underlying it, and the overriding sort of colonial kind of legitimization for which allows for continued sort of, extraction of resources and selling of arms or whatever it is, whatever the big motivators are, it's a microcosm, Palestine. And that's what everyone's eyes need to be on, Palestine, Israel. Because if you don't want multiple apartheid systems, if you don't want this rehearsal of the future, as the Colombian president said, being enacted in Gaza, then you have to stop it now. And you need your arts organizations standing up against it, and your universities, and your students. And you shouldn't be having situations in the US, which they had at like Indiana University, where people protesting against genocide, students, kids, idealistic kids, lovely, protesting against genocide, having sniper rifles targeted against them. I mean, what's going on? It's like, you can't just say, well, it's just Palestine and therefore everything has to be shut down. They're all terrorists. The terrorist vocabulary and the way of seeing things is just like they're terrorists, everything they do is bad. It's a limited, damning, stupid justification. We need context, as Guterres says, as Gideon's saying. We need context, and we need understanding, and we need systems which can fight for those who don't have the ability to resist what's going on.
Shashank, speaking of those who don't have the ability to resist what's going on, reminds me of Ukraine. What do you think is the current state of play there? Is the tide turning in favor of Russia decisively?
I think the tide certainly has turned. You could argue whether Ukraine ever really had a chance to take back significant amounts of territory after the first couple of months of war. This is an army in the Russian army that is extremely good at this type of warfare. They have almost unlimited numbers of bodies that they can throw at this problem, to be very crude about it in military terms. And look, we have to be very clear that the delays in getting more advanced weapons to Ukraine, the delay and delay and delay over, almost on every single weapon that, whether it started with the tanks and then the air defense systems and the warplanes. I don't like speaking in terms of military hardware, as we're here on a panel and we want to talk about people's lives, but these things matter in a war. And the fact that these weapons have been so difficult to unlock from the West, even with the kind of rallying around Europe that's happened, has made a difference, has really helped Russian forces get entrenched. Let's not forget that in 2014, Russia did invade a big part of eastern Ukraine, and those battle lines were drawn very clearly, and Ukraine is not going to get that territory back. It is unlikely to get Crimea back. I think what they're hoping for is some sort of frozen, conflict at this point. But it's clear that, while Ukraine is not going to get a lot of territory back, it will be difficult for Russia to advance much deeper as well. We're fighting now over really ruined villages.
Basically, a war of attrition is going to continue.
It is, and it's frozen, I think, for the foreseeable future. And I think, sadly, I think the world's attention is only going to move farther and farther away from it.
Gideon, the conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza have also brought into sharp relief the dysfunction of the UN Security Council, where now, the 5 permanent members are merely using the veto every time something happens that threatens their immediate interests. So can the UNSC be fixed, or you think it's beyond repair now?
First of all, you didn't need those 2 wars in order to understand that the Security Council is paralyzed. I mean, by definition, the fact that there are some countries who have a veto paralyze the whole thing. I mean, this is sick. Why do they have this veto first?
They have the veto because the League of Nations did not have the veto, and it collapsed.
Sure. So, but having said this, I wouldn't underestimate the role of the international community in those conflicts, and mainly in the Gaza conflict or in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I don't even like to call it Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There was never a French-Algerian conflict. There was an occupation of France of Algeria. No conflict. And the same here. My only source of hope for the future is from the international community. Will it be the UN or civil societies? And we see what civil societies can do. Civil societies were very affected with the first apartheid state. Why can't they be as effective in the second apartheid states in history? And you can see that civil societies are now waking up, mainly in the United States. It's very regretful that today United States, at least the progressive part of the United States, is more advanced than the progressive part in Europe. We have to admit it. It was the opposite for many years. But this gives you a source of hope for 2 things. First of all, those students who protest today in Harvard, in Columbia, in UCLA, in other places, they are the next future of leaders. The Bidens will disappear. Biden is maybe the last Zionist American president. This will not happen anymore. In Europe, the guilt feeling about the Holocaust will one day get weaker. Still, this generation carry a lot of guilt feelings which are justified by they shouldn't dictate policies, but they do dictate policies, and Israel is knowing how to manipulate it. But by the end of the day, we are facing a new generation, which is very, very promising, I must say, especially in the last months. And being so promising gives me a source of hope, because if any one of you expect that the Israelis will wake up one shining morning, look at the window and say, oh, that's not so nice, this apartheid state. No, the occupation is not a nice thing. Let's put an end to it. This will never happen. It will only happen if Israel will pay a price for its crimes, and the price can be made only by the international community.
Shashank, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I just want to, as the lone American on the stage here, I want to take the rare opportunity to stand in praise of America on the world stage in some ways, because I do agree with Gideon that to see these protests happening on campuses in the United States in the last several months has been really a surprise to me in some ways. I grew up in the 80s and 90s in the US. I think I was fully at university in the late 90s when I learned that there were two sides to the Israel-Palestine issue. So thorough is the education about what is happening in the Middle East. There was only the Israeli side of things. And so to see now, the encampments and the keffiyehs and the flags and the language that this generation is using, one hopes that you could glimpse a future of a more kind of a more diverse and really a more thoughtful generation to come. Because I agree, this is really a generational thing we're looking at in the United States.
Selma, some would say that this multipolar disorder actually started from Britain. So you think Brexit was the beginning of the end of globalization?
Yeah, I mean, I think 2016 was a very decisive year. I think it was Trump coming to power as well. I think a lot of what he did in terms of tying up previous agreements, yes, that sort of dented the idea that these things should stick or that one should stand by one's word on a whole different level. I think with the Brexit vote, I don't know how much weight one should put on it as being a reflection on what informed people were feeling at the time, and whether it's the start of a trend. Okay, because I think at the time it was happening, there were a lot of movements in France and Denmark to also split from Europe. Those trends seem to have reversed now. So that staying in Europe, because it has been so disastrous economically for the UK, which is really gets sort of tiny little, these in-depth reports on quite how disastrous it is to the economy get buried somewhere in the papers. You sort of say, well, we all knew that, but anyway, it happened. But also I think there was a lot of manipulation around the way that the question was framed here. I think the referendum could be done a lot more intelligently. Maybe you could have had 2 referendums. You could have extended it out to 17-year-olds and the vote would have gone the other way. If they took the vote again today, it would not go in the way that it did. So how much weight one should put on it. But it definitely did dismantle what I think was a pretty good system of being ruled by bureaucrats, which is kind of an ideal for me. Because it was just, it allowed for, I mean, having worked in this country as a lawyer, we had really fantastic provisions in terms of the European Convention on Human Rights, in terms of basic standards for sex and race discrimination, fair pay. It's it's a nice sort of semi-socialist system of living that was provided by Europe, and it was the UK was quite keen to sort of get rid of these things and, just say, let's have an unwritten constitution. But it led to the, Bill of Rights in this country and a Human Rights Act, all things which we were thinking as great and progressive. So I think it was erosive of what was a positive thing, to my mind, for this country and for the European bloc, and disabled it to work as a sort of in terms of foreign policy. It's the EU's foreign policy on Gaza I'm not in favor of, but that's beside the point. But I think this issue as to whether globalization in itself is a good thing, I have some issues on. I think I'm very much in favor of the global rules-based order and sovereign states having a degree of autonomy, and protecting their own economies, but then coming together that there are basic red lines that shouldn't be crossed. I think that the WTO and GATT and this sort of it very much favored these sort of multinationals, mega corporations, which are really wreaking havoc now on a level beyond what states are doing. And that's a concern to me.
Shashank, now migration has become a big political issue in Britain. And now Prime Minister Sunak has called an election on the 4th of July. How do you think this issue is going to impact the political landscape of Britain?
Migration certainly has been a big issue. I guess I would defer to Selma as well as a Brit, but I think the issues that are at play in the election and the weakness of the Tories in this election is really multifaceted. It's economic. It's years and years of scandal. It's just kind of anti-incumbency at this point. It's now at this point very clear that no one's going to be sent to Rwanda. This policy really felt like the last gasp of a kind of a dying regime, and so I think it seemed like for a while it was the type of policy that was a sop to its base. Back when the economy, was sort of ticking over, you could throw this type of issue out to your constituents as one that, look, we're protecting our borders. It worked for Trump in the U.S. as well. But at a certain point, these types of governments and these types of regimes, if we could say, collapse of their own weight, of time, of sclerotic governing, of all these factors that weigh on democratic regimes over time. So I think it is not the galvanizing issue, I don't think, in these weeks to come, although it certainly has been one that's riled up the left, which would also work against them. So I think, let's see. I'll be curious to see, what happens to the migration issue under a Labour government and kind of what the future for that issue holds here.
Gideon, now turning to Europe, the far right has won elections in Italy and the Netherlands. They lead the polls in France, Austria, and Belgium, and they have a stake in the governments of Finland and Slovakia. Why do you think right-wing populist movements are gaining so much traction all across Europe? And what implications does this trend hold for the continent's political future?
First of all, pay attention to a very interesting phenomena. Those are the best friends of Israel now.
Oh, right, yes.
But this is, by the way, I think, and I'm not an expert for Europe, you know about Europe much more than I do, but I have the feeling that the main issue is immigration. And if to be more specific, it is about Islamophobia. And the right wing is being built on this, on hatred toward the others, racism, hatred towards the dark ones, the brown ones, the black ones, and the Muslim ones. I know a little bit more about Sweden because my partner is Swedish, and I saw what happened in Sweden. Sweden was a paradise for immigrants. They got everything, and Sweden was maybe the most open country for immigration. And Swedes are now having second thoughts because there are certain phenomena, and I can't blame them. They really did the best. They really did their best. As far as I can judge, they did the best. They provided them with jobs and with pensions and with healthcare and with anything possible. And I don't think that Swedish society is racist. For sure not more than other societies, but maybe even less. It's quite a healthy society. And now you see that they have second thoughts because there are so many problems with the immigrants who are not accepting the system. And you see how people turn into being right-wingers. Finally, becoming right-winger is always about hatred. If it's in Israel, it's about hating the Palestinians. If it's in Europe, it's about hating the immigrants. It's always about racism, and it's always about dehumanization of those who are not like you. And that's very regretful, obviously.
Last question, Selma. I've just come from Delhi, where the maximum temperature reached a sizzling 52.3 degrees Celsius. Are we rushing blindly into a global catastrophe with 2.3 degrees Celsius global warming? What's going to happen?
It's a very big question to end on. But yeah, I mean, I think, I hate to think that anything is irreversible. I mean, I think the one thing, if you're working on Palestinian issues, you have to really maintain optimism always. You always have to think that there's a possibility, a chink for change, even if someone like Gideon says that he and the people who think like him could fit into a telephone box in Israel, they're the ones we have to really focus on. So I think if there are areas of things that can change, and I think regulation, some form of global order. I've really become quite devout about my belief in the law, less about democracy, more in belief in the law. What's happening in Gaza at the moment, I hadn't really quantified before quite how massive an impact an assault like that can have on the climate. I mean, apparently in the first 2 months, you had more carbon dioxide emissions than 20 developing, like, global south nations which are climate vulnerable in 2 years. You have, like, massive amounts of chemical pollutants and which are impacting global warming due to a war. I hadn't really thought about war. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not climate, is a little bit off to the margins, but I'm hoping that with the Palestine movement and the climate justice movement, which is a broader umbrella of issues with regards to social justice and anti-racism and trying to reframe our past, try and look at the kind of colonial legacy and how it affects our way of thinking about how society can be structured. I hope that this level of intensity and urgency that we're currently feeling in an extreme way in Palestine at the moment, that people will see it and say, we can't have that. You know, we have to stop. Something has to be reined in.
So on that note of hope, let's open this up to the audience. We have about 10 minutes for a Q&A. So, yeah, this lady here.
So many possible questions. The sense of Thank you. So many possible questions. It all feels quite surreal to be sitting here talking about things when people are dying as we speak. I'll try and limit myself to 2 brief questions, one for Gideon, one for Selma. Gideon, one hears more and more now that the numbers of people who have died hovering around the 35,000 is in fact a gross underestimation, that the numbers of people missing would suggest that the actual figures may be in the region of 200,000 plus. And there's some credible voices raising that. I wonder what your thoughts are about that. And my question for Selma is, I share your concern as a lawyer as well, that we are eroding the things that we thought were entrenched and that we held so dear. Freedom of speech not being the only one, but certainly one that causes a great deal of concern. And perhaps our antennas are sharper because we are lawyers. But I am frankly terrified that we are sacrificing the institutions and the principles and values that our societies are built on. And the cost of losing them, the cost of eroding them, is not one people are really talking about or appreciating, and the fear that were these only veneers that have now been stripped away? Was it the case that the emperor was never wearing any clothes?
Gideon. Oh, okay. Selma, you can go first, yeah.
I think, thank you for the question. I mean, it's a really broad one. I hope that it's not a question that the emperor was wearing no clothes. I hope that there is a basic notion of justice in this country which is able to withstand the type of vocabulary that is swilling around and being propagated against minorities. It's this sort of winds of racism, the way that they're built up, the way that they're spread by the press, the way that they remain unchecked. I mean, immigration in this country is a net benefit to the economy. The positive examples of it are multiple. I think people in the cities are very used to it, and a lot of the Brexit vote came from the countryside, where actually people had not experienced, the immigrant populations were smaller. So it's sort of the fear of the unknown was affecting voters more. People within the cities were not having that response. So I hope that it's I mean, the erosions at the moment, we've got the universities are severely under attack. We've got the institution, the freedom of expression. I'm not impressed by the role of the media, particularly the BBC, in terms of its coverage. And then when you complain about the role of the BBC, you find that people within Ofcom, the regulator, have also, who have tweeted things which maybe were sympathetic, have been removed from office. So you have this problem of a sort of multi-layered shutdown when it comes to Palestine. And that's, again, even if you're totally disinterested in Palestine, Israel and the people, but just as a study, as a case study, as to how one group of people, one section of society can be sort of gagged, effectively gagged, discredited and delegitimized from being part of the public discourse, which is, and the Palestinians are particularly vulnerable because so many of them are stateless and so many of them do not have a state government which is backing them, an effective state government. So I think it's, as a case study, it's really important. And so my sort of bottom line, why I'm sort of, as a lawyer, feel very strongly about this is I feel that if the law in this country is good enough to protect Palestinians, it's good enough to protect everyone. And if you look at everything from the universities and the whole of the rest of the educational system across the board, with that sort of in your mind, you can see where the risks are, where the chinks are, where the corruption is, where the pressure is, where the, yeah. I don't know if I fully answered it, but not really.
I would like to tell you that in this stage, figures don't matter so much anymore. There are now contradictory figures because don't forget there was also a few weeks ago a report by the UN which claimed that only half of the figure is verified killed people. I would like also to say when you mentioned the 200,000 victims that we in our camp, I don't know you, but we who fight against this war should be very careful not to exaggerate because it's counterproductive. You will say now 200,000, Israel will prove it's only 180,000, and then there is no problem. What do you want? You say 200,000, we killed only 180,000. That's the most moral army in the world, yeah? But seriously speaking, I think we crossed this stage. Gaza is a hell now. Would it be 200,000 for every killed person? It's a horrible reality, obviously, for the family. But it's not only about the killed people. Let's also remember that it's about the one who survived, the starvation. I see those scenes of children dying on fancy floors in hospitals or what used to be hospitals. You see the starving children. Think about their mental situation. What will they carry for the rest of their lives when their parents and brothers and sisters were killed in front of them? What will come out of this place after all this? So the statistic is important, but we reached a point in which the catastrophe is so big already that really it must stop in any case.
Short question, please. We just have about 4 minutes.
Sanjoy gave us 2 more minutes as a credit.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
It's a short question, but I'm not sure if you can answer it quickly. I'd slightly question the use of the word the success of the Hamas attack, Gideon, that you used in the opening remarks. And in the interest of balance, what should the Palestinians do about Hamas, in your opinion?
Success from their point of view, obviously. From their point of view, they had some achievements and we can't deny it. For the long run, I will say something and the opposite. On one hand, they didn't serve the Palestinian cause. By all means not. The Palestinians who suffer finally will not suffer less because of this war. Not for the short run for sure, and most probably also not for the long run. We saw what happened with the second Intifada, the uprising. It really just made things much worse for the Palestinians, first of all. And I'm not sure that Hamas cares about the Palestinian people, because would they care about the Palestinian people, they would have prepared this war with shelters, with hospitals, money. There was enough. And to go to such a war without any protection to the civil society, knowing how brutal Israel can become, was by itself criminal. But in the same time, you can't deny that there are some political achievements from their point of view. Hamas is now the hero of the Arab world. The hero of the Arab world. Who is the hero? Fatah, the PA? No, Hamas is now the hero of the world. I'm not happy about it, not at all. The Palestinian people shouldn't be happy about it, but you can't ignore it.
Yeah, the lady there at the back.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, we see young people exercising their democratic practices through protests, but what is actually required in order to kind of change the system? If we're seeing that it's not working, is it some sort of dismantlement or is it just a readjustment of our institutions?
Well, I mean, generational change obviously takes generations, and I think what you're seeing now is a sign that young people do want to see something different. It will take time for those voices to get positions of power. Running for office is important, organizing is important, keeping the pressure on the streets is important. Politicians, to the extent that they are responsible to voters, they have to respond to political pressure. So I think, at a young age, you don't maybe have money, you don't maybe have political power, you don't maybe have the benefits of office. You do have your voice, and voices are speaking very loudly in this world today. Change is very, very, very slow. But it doesn't mean we should discount what people are doing in the streets.
Last question.
You can also defund and boycott.
This is a question for both Selma and Gideon. What is the role of the Palestinian Authority in all of this? I mean, do you think in going forward, because Hamas is usually discredited by the Israelis and the Americans because they call them a terrorist outfit. So do you think the PA, if they come in, would the Israelis be more open to having a conversation which could lead towards peace in the future? Just wanted to see what your thoughts are on this.
So where's the PLA in all this?
Thank you. It's a really complicated picture because we had, the Palestinians had the Palestinian Liberation Organization, so we had a global organization which was representatives of Palestinians in the camps, in diaspora and inside. This has been systematically dismantled, and what we have now is something closer to like a Vichy government, really. There's a real problem of legitimacy in terms of the way that Palestinians view the PA. There's been a lot of collaboration on security issues, which makes it not really hold much weight with most Palestinians. There's a lot of criticism of it. It's seen as doing a lot of Israel's dirty work. But having said that, there are some exceptional individuals working within it, particularly within the UN system. There are some very articulate and well-meaning people, and it's a mixed bag. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not an expert on the different negotiating tracks and routes and what could work and what couldn't work. I think Gideon I'd defer to on that, but I'm saying that as a sort of like bastion of hope, it's a very complicated picture, to say the least.
One of the main problems for both sides are that they lack leadership, and for sure courageous leadership. Speaking about the PA lost its relevance, unfortunately so. In times of Arafat, he had the big advantage of really representing the entire Palestinian people, even though there was criticism, but it was very clear that he is the leader. With the help of Israel, without the help of Israel, the PA became totally irrelevant. You asked if there will be another leadership, how will Israel react? We saw how Israel reacted when there was a leadership. We went to Oslo, which only now I understand, and many others, that it was a trap and it didn't lead to anywhere, and it just brought more injustice and more suffer for the Palestinian people. And then there was a serious partner for negotiations. It's very clear for me that the PA has to go. It's anachronistic. It's lacking new ideas. The Palestinians has to find a new way. But having said all this, I must just conclude and say it's very hard for me to criticize the Palestinians or to blame them, because they really started anything, everything, and nothing worked for them. They started diplomacy, so they called it diplomatic terror, and they tried economically, and they call it economical terror, and they tried struggle without arms first, with stones in the first intifada, and they were blamed as killers, and then came the second intifada. They tried really everything, and they are facing a very, very powerful rival. And I think still the key is in Israel's hand, not in the Palestinian hands. And the Israeli hand is refusing to shake the Palestinian hand, as simple as this.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gideon Levy, Selma Dabbagh, and Shashank Bengali. Thank you.